Mike Johnson is the new Speaker of the House. If you don't know who Mike Johnson is, do not feel bad. He is not a senior Republican. He is not a extremely experienced Republican legislator. He doesn't have a history of getting a ton of great and amazing legislation through the House. He's not someone like Mitch McConnell, Lindsey Graham, Kevin McCarthy, someone who's been in there for a while. So you have no reason to really know him outside of if you are from Louisiana and he's in your district, right? Or if you're, for example, against things like national abortion bans, which he has co-sponsored, or if you were looking at what Republicans voted against the bill to legalize same-sex marriage on the federal level to try to codify it. He voted against that. The last Republican House Speaker nominee, Tom Emmer, voted in favor of it. And that was something that sabotaged him, but didn't sabotage Mike Johnson. Of course, the idea of being okay with gay marriage, which the vast majority of like 70 to 80% of Americans are okay with. I mean, that, shouldn't be in normal circumstances a disqualifier, but for Tom Emmer, it was a disqualifier. For Mike Johnson, it was not a disqualifier. Anyway, I want to tell you a few things about this guy. This is this Rolling Stone article, and when I read the headline, I was like, I don't know, man. We just had Jim Jordan as the nominee, and I read this headline, the new House Speaker is a far-right extremist who helped the plot to 2020 coup. I was like, I don't know. Do we really know that in comparison to Jim Jordan? I mean, do we really know that? But doing the slightest amount of research, because everybody's trying to go up and study on Mike Johnson now. He did oppose the certification of the vote in 2020. He was one of the 137 Republicans that tried to organize an effort to overturn the election results by sending it down to the state level so that the legislators in the mostly Republican-controlled state legislators could overturn the election results away from the democratically elected presidential nominee, Joe Biden, in favor of the incumbent at the time, Donald Trump. Now, he was doing this without any strong evidence that the case against our election system, there was no, sorry. I'm still angry about the YouTube monetization. My mind's a little foggy. There's no evidence that widespread fraud overturned the election results. There was no evidence presented at the time, and there's been no evidence presented since then. The cases that they brought forward to both the state and federal courts failed. But Mike Johnson continued anyway. Whether it was to simp for Trump and to get his affection, whether it was because he believed that there was a certain faction of voters in his district that would vote against him if he did not do everything that Trump asked for, everything that he pleaded for. I don't know what his motivations was. I don't know what his motivations are moving forward on an issue like this. I can assume a few of them when it comes to not falling out of Trump's favor, since it was Trump's endorsement, his nod, that helped Mike Johnson get the speakership in the first place. But the point is, he was against the certification of the vote for the democratically elected leader of the president and the current president of the United States, Joe Biden, after he democratically won the vote. And he did it with no evidence because Donald Trump said so. Donald Trump, against the advice of his attorney general, against the advice of his daughter, against the advice of everybody around him with brain cells, multiple investigators, judges, would all turn to him and say there is no evidence of election fraud. They would turn to these legislators and say the same thing, but he plowed forward anyway. And what I assume, because I don't want to make too many assumptions about his interests, was self-motivated. Motivated by him wanting to keep his seat, wanting to keep Trump's favor, and now that it's paid off for him. But I just want to say quickly that having somebody third in line to the presidency who is against the process playing out and the democratically elected president being hoisted to the office in the peaceful transfer of power, who is against that or worked in the processes against that system, I don't think that's safe. And I think that should be a disqualifier. Because if somebody shows that they're willing to compromise on that peaceful transfer of power, when it's clear to everyone that Donald Trump lost the election, The evidence is overwhelming that he lost the election. And you can only assume that he didn't if you're walking back from your conclusion. I don't think it's safe to have him as House Speaker. I don't think it is. And I don't think there's any compromise that he could have offered the Democrats should have accepted in order to nominate him as House Speaker if he didn't have the votes to do so. But because he was in favor of overturning the 2020 election results, because he was against gay marriage, because he's co-sponsored 3, and he's currently is still co-sponsoring 3 national abortion bans. You remember when, Roe v. Wade is horrible, Roe v. Wade is awful, we're just going to kick it back to the states, we're not going to do no national abortion ban, we're just going to kick it back to the states. That's over. Third person in line to the presidency is co-sponsoring 3 national abortion bans. I wonder if he's going to bring it forward for a vote. Guess we'll have to wait and see. Either way, some people are trying to paint Mike Johnson as a moderate. I do not believe he is a moderate. He's not a moderate on gay marriage. He's not a moderate when it comes to American democracy. And he's not a moderate when it comes to issues like abortion or the church or any other number of social and economic issues where he wants to make massive cuts to Social Security, massive cuts to Medicare. He is not Jim Jordan. He's Jim Jordan light. Anyway, Mike Johnson is the nominee, though. Not the nominee. He is now the speaker. God, I'm sorry. There were so many different nominees. The whole process with the Republicans, a little discombobulating. I'm still trying to process, what exactly happened. What is going to happen now? Well, Mike Johnson is now going to have to vote on a budget. We're coming up on the November 17th deadline for the continuation of budget negotiations, which got Kevin McCarthy ousted in the first place. And the Republicans have wasted 3 weeks fighting and scuffling and yelling at each other over who was going to be the next House Speaker, whether it was going to be Kevin McCarthy again, whether it was going to be Steve Scalise, whether it was going to be Jim Jordan, whether it was going to be Tom Ettner. Sorry, I'm forgetting everybody's name. And now it's Mike Johnson. He spent 3 weeks doing that. So now Mike Johnson is stating like, hey, we got to pick it up. We got to go fast. We're not going to do all the bells and whistles to celebrate. We're going to go straight into the legislation. And one of the compromises he made in order to get the speakership that got people like Matt Gaetz and Lauren Boebert to vote for him was that instead of having one big omnibus bill for the budget, he wants to have 12 separate spending bills and then have people vote on them separately. That was a compromise that got Matt Gaetz to vote with him. Now, I'm not in principle against something like that. But one thing I am worried about is that somebody with not a lot of legislative experience hoisted to the speakership with a deadline of 20 days to find a deal, and he's now got to go through not one bill but 12 bills after so much chaos. I'm not against the bills necessarily being split up in that way, but I don't know if Mike Johnson is somebody who can actually pull this off. Does anybody else have a legislative record from Mike Johnson to be able to pull this off? Like anything that he's done like this before? I mean, it's kind of uncharted territory for the guy. The only way we'll find out is by waiting and seeing. There are other Republicans that are going to be in his corner that are helping him along the way, people who have assisted Kevin McCarthy in the past, people who have assisted Paul Ryan, who was a previous Republican House Speaker in the past, or people who are more veteran legislators in the House. I assume they're going to help him, but I don't know if he can pull it off because, again, he's not that experienced. So that's the first issue I have with Mike Johnson and the plan to move forward is I don't know if he can. I mean, I don't know if he can manage the one bill due to his lack of experience, but now he wants to manage 12. Anyway, putting that aside, I already know he's not going to bring forward a lot of the legislation that I want to bring forward to the House floor. I've said before that I want the child tax credit to be brought to the House floor. I want to be able to find some compromise to bring it back. Maybe if we don't get $500 a month, maybe we can get $250, maybe we can get $300. The child tax credit helped cut child poverty in half. That should be a priority for Democrats to bring it back. In fact, when it was designed by the Biden administration, it was not designed to just be there for a little bit and then just cut off. It was supposed to be the starting point for addressing family poverty, for addressing childhood poverty, malnutrition. But instead, it was just briefly implemented. We saw it succeed and then taken away at the first opportunity. And as this guy is painting himself as a spending hawk, he's not going to want to see any legislation like that. He's already proposing big cuts to try to get the budget in order. Now, whether that's serious or not, and where he's going to make the budget cuts, I don't know. He has a record of proposing it for Medicare and Social Security, so I assume he's probably going to make the cuts in social programs. But he's also somebody who's a big fan of tax cuts. So if his policy, which was the Trump policy, and considering how closely he tied with Trump he is, I imagine that is going to be somewhat similar. If his policy is to deal with this budgetary crisis, we're going to make cuts to Social Security and cuts to Medicare and cuts to social programs, while also dealing out large tax breaks for corporations and the wealthiest among us. That will just make the fiscal position of the United States worse. It'll just make the deficit bigger, and it will just put us in a worse position, as did the Trump tax cuts during his administration. Did he make cuts to social programs? He did. They were not big enough to make up for the cuts to taxes. So we're going to have to wait to see how he's going to approach the budget. I assume it's going to be somewhat similar to how Trump tried to approach the budget. The big issue for me, of course, being in Ukraine, is how he's going to approach Ukraine aid. And I am not excited, because this is his record.
A curd is a curd.
Lidovexer has donated $300.
Whoa!
This gives you some breathing room.
That does give me breathing room. $300 certainly gives me breathing room. Well, damn, thank you for the $300. I greatly appreciate it. That legitimately gives me breathing room. Okay, thank you. I really appreciate that, Lidovexer, thank you. Damn, thank you, actually. See, I don't know, this is the problem I have with big donations, okay? This is the problem I have when you bastards give me money, okay? When somebody donates me $50, I'm like, hey, thank you so much. But then when somebody donates $300, like, I feel like, what, if I was to, like, do this proportionately, like, my reaction would be something like, oh, no way! Oh, whoa, what? Whoa! You know, like I see on all the other Twitch channels, but that's not my genuine reaction, right? Not because I'm not excited. Of course I'm excited to get $300, but I just want to give you my genuine reaction. Like, genuinely, thank you. That does give me breathing room, and that does help the channel. Thank you for the $300. That does help, because it just does help. Shit. Don't overthink it. Yeah, that's the problem. I start overthinking it. Shut up and like it. Thank you. I'll shut up and I'll take the money. Thank you. Anyway, where were we? Representative Mike Johnson has a absolutely terrible record on Ukraine. While when the war broke out, he did vote in favor of the Lend-Lease Act, like the vast majority of legislators all across the board, because the vast majority of the American people supported it. There was a ton of pressure at the time for the American government to act, and so he voted in favor of the Lend-Lease Act. Then, as time went on, we started to see Representative Mike Johnson show some different colors. He voted against the 2022 Ukraine Supplemental Appropriation Act. He voted in favor of Amendment 21 to H.R. 2670, the National Defense Authorization Act, which would have stricken $300 million of assistance to Ukraine. He voted in favor of Amendment 22 to H.R. 2670, the National Defense Authorization Act, which would have prohibited all security assistance to Ukraine. Meaning he voted in favor of not just stopping this one $300 million aid package, or this aid package or that aid package. He wanted to stop all aid across the board, and he voted in favor of it. He voted in favor of Amendment 25 to H.R. 2670, which would have remove the extension of the Lend-Lease Authority to Ukraine. So the thing he voted in favor of earlier, the Lend-Lease Authority, the one good thing, he then voted against it later, once the heat died down and the attention died down. Voted against H.R. 5692, Ukraine Security Assistance and Oversight Supplemental Appropriations Act of 2023, which was, again, legislation to help Ukraine, aid to help Ukraine. And he has made anti-Ukraine statements in the past. So this is his record on this. And look, I could go into a bunch of reasons that motivate this. Like I said before, I don't want to make assumptions. I think a lot of it has to do with the growing isolationist sentiment within the Republican Party. But the problem I have with that conclusion is he's super in favor of aid to Israel. In fact, his first act, once he got this position in the speakership, was to pass a resolution condemning Hamas. Now, I gotta be honest, right? I don't like Hamas. I don't think mowing down people in their kibbutz is good. I think that's horrible. I think it's disgusting. I think it's awful. I think after the Republicans put everything on pause for so long, I think really acting would be getting some legislation done around our nation's finances, would be, if you really even wanted to help Israel, passing the bundle that Joe Biden has pushed to the House to pass, the $106 billion. That would be something that would make sense because you're doing something, but it's a condemnation. Now, they are going to move on to those issues, but just to give you an idea that he's perfectly in favor of sending aid to Israel, he wants to send aid to Israel because he believes that it is within America's national security interests, and he believes it religiously. He is a religious diehard, and he believes as a Christian that it is our duty to help the land of Israel, to help the Jewish people in any of their struggles. Number one, I think that second reason is stupid, and I'm not saying it's stupid to insult his religion. I'm saying it's stupid because it's a bad idea to base governmental policies based off of biblical prophecy. I think that's a bad idea. Not only did Jesus say, and the Bible said pretty clearly, that you're not going to be able to predict my resurrection. Don't try to, bring this shit about. That's stupid. That's not his exact words, but that was the gist of it. I also think that you should not be basing governmental policy off of thousands year old religious text. You should base it off of secular policies. You should base it off of our secular constitution. I think that should be the basis of our foreign policy. Should be looking at the situation rationally and determining if it's in favor of global stability or national security interests, and why should we support something, not the Bible said so. I think that's silly. But on the first issue, it's within our national security interests. The complaint against aid to Ukraine has been that it is wasteful financially. And as a finance hawk, that's Mike Johnson, you understand that position. I can understand that position. What I don't understand, which is the position of Marjorie Taylor Greene and Mike Johnson, is stop the aid to Ukraine, but continue the aid to Israel. Ukraine's an endless war. This 80 to 100 year religious conflict between the Palestinians and the Israelis? No. That's not an endless war. Give them our last 2 Iron Dome systems. Give them 300 interceptors. Give them artillery shells. Give them bombs to drop from their jets. Give them this. Give them that. I just don't think it makes sense. And the only explanation is that they want to please their religious voter base. And from how Mike Johnson has talked about it, that is the vibe that I'm getting. Whether he himself actually believes in it or not, I don't know. I don't think it makes sense to base our policies off the Bible. I don't think it's good for us to be basing our policies based off of our people's religious sensibilities. I don't think that's smart when looking at it from a national security perspective. And I think the endless war argument about Ukraine is hypocritical if you're now supporting a conflict or sending weapons to a conflict that has lasted much longer. Anyway, no one is basing policy off of the Bible. What the fuck, lols? Okay, I'm gonna just be blunt with you. There are multiple Republicans in the House who are 100% basing their support for Israel over their support for Ukraine based on the fact that they have a large evangelical base who wants to support Israel no matter what. We know that. Marjorie Taylor Greene has expressed that openly in interviews with multiple news outlets. Other Republicans have expressed that sentiment openly. You cannot make the argument that it's not smart for America to spend money on endless wars and say, now let's send more money to the Israelis, unless there's something else about that struggle that makes them have a bias towards the Israelis over the Ukrainians, even though, in my estimation, it makes a lot more sense from a national security perspective to help the Ukrainians push against the Russian invasion, whether it comes to nuclear non-proliferation, whether it comes to the stability of Europe, which has produced the economic prosperity in the United States ever since the end of the Second World War, whether it means keeping Russia from infringing upon NATO states, which would mean bringing ourselves directly into the conflict. Anytime there's a big war in Europe, we seem to get involved. Point is, yes, 100%. Religion does play a role in Republican support for Israel. It even plays a role amongst many Democrats' support for Israel. Definitely the ones that are living in somewhat red districts. Anyway, I don't think the logic plays out. But, instead of me like going to his record with the American Ethane Company, the American Ethane Company, which has ties to Putin-aligned oligarchs, I'm not going to go into any of that. I'm not going to go into, what's the real interest? I mean, I don't want to go into, I don't want to call it conspiracy peddling, but I don't want to just start making guesses here and guesses there. What I do want to do is see what he has had to say so far about aid to Ukraine. Because we've got two statements from him on aid to Ukraine that'll give us an idea of whether his record is going to keep on riding now that he's House Speaker, or he's going to have to change his position since now he has a broader Republican coalition behind him that he needs to please. Because there's also pro-Ukraine Republicans in the House. The last vote on aid to Ukraine, about half of House Republicans voted in favor and about half of House Republicans voted against. And as House Speaker, he is going to have to find some way to make both camps happy. Hopefully, he's going to have to find some way. Hopefully. And this is the two statements that he's released on it. One second. I know I have it here somewhere. Here it is. Johnson said his first priority would be to pass a resolution denouncing Hamas for the October 7th attacks in Israel that left more than 1,400 people dead. Israel is said to be preparing for a ground offensive in the Hamas-controlled Gaza Strip, and lawmakers have been anxious to show support for the key U.S. ally as the speaker's fight dragged on. The House moved quickly to take up the resolution, scheduling a vote on the measure for Wednesday afternoon. Johnson's in the House is overdue in getting it done. The White House has requested an emergency aid package worth $106 billion, which would include $14 billion in aid to Israel. The administration also wants $61 billion to further fund Ukraine's struggle and replenish U.S. stockpiles of weapons and ammunition. That has already emerged as a sticking point with some Republicans who want to consider aid to Israel separately. That I'm not against, but I understand how Biden is trying to put it together and make it harder for them to fight against it. Johnson's blueprint for the next several weeks did not mention taking up aid packages, but he said Wednesday that it's a top priority. So we don't know when he's going to take up this bill. So far, it's we condemn Hamas, whether he's going to actually do anything around getting aid to Israel, which I don't even necessarily agree with, sending them like artillery shells, stuff like that. But whether he's going to actually do anything in the near future, in the immediate future, we don't know for sure, but he says it's a priority. Here's the statement about Ukraine. We'll be talking about the support and what's necessary to get it. We have to ensure that Vladimir Putin is not successful. And I think all House Republicans are united in that cause. This is bullshit, but I mean, it's still good to hear it from him. We'll be talking about how that's going to be done here in the coming days, and it's a top priority. So he is saying that for him, a top priority is making sure that Vladimir Putin is not successful in Ukraine. Now, that wording is very strange to me. When I say strange, I mean it's very vague, because it depends on what you determine Russian success in Ukraine to be. If you measure Russian success by their original goals, those have already been prevented, at least largely been prevented. They have not been able to change the government in Kiev. They have been unable to demilitarize Ukraine. They have been unable to take all of Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporozhye, and Kherson. They have been unable to recapture the city of Kherson. So if you measure it by their original goals, at some point he could say, well, we've already met those goals. But if you're measuring it over, well, what is the goals of Ukraine and Russia now? And are we going to achieve the Ukrainian goal of pushing the Russians out, or the Russians going to hold on to what they can and try to expand their holdings? Then that's a different scenario. So I don't know what he means by that Vladimir Putin must be stopped. He cannot be successful. And I think that we're united in it. Number one, they're not united in it. but I don't know what he measures success by. Because if, in one way, somebody could read this as, oh, so he wants to stop Putin from taking any Ukrainian land. But you could also measure it as, he wants to stop Putin from taking any land past the 2014 borders. Or they want to stop Putin from taking his original goals in the 2022 war. It could be any number of these things. So I don't really know. Here's another statement he put out. Here we go.
Mr. Speaker, do you support additional aid to Ukraine?
We all do. We're going to have conditions on that, so we're working through it.
What kind of conditions?
We want accountability and we want objectives that are clear from the White House. But we're going to have those discussions. They're going to be very productive.
Again, he doesn't say much here. He says, yes, that he's in favor of aid, and most Republicans are. Now, that doesn't align with his record, and I trust the record more than I trust his word, but this is at least a positive signal. But when he says we need accountability, we need some like addendum, we need some like asterisks applied to this aid. We need accountability. What does he mean by accountability? I don't know what he means by that. That could mean anything from we're appointing an attorney general to we're going to cut the amount of aid sent over. He needs to specify what he means by that. Well, not an attorney general, an inspector general. Apply an inspector general to oversee the aid. Does that mean sending more American staffers here in order to check the stockpiles and check what has been used and what hasn't been used and check that with the numbers of what has been sent? What that exactly means, I don't know. It's all very vague, but I will say that generally from the messaging that he's putting out, it's pro sending more aid to Ukraine. It's pro bringing votes to the House floor on aid to Ukraine, which every Democrat will vote in favor of aid to Ukraine. And from the last vote that we saw, around half of Republicans will also vote in favor of aid to Ukraine. Or at least, even if it's less than half Republicans, maybe it's 40%, 30%, 10% of Republicans would be enough to pass it in the House. And the Democrats have it in the Senate, and there's enough Republicans in the Senate to pass it in the Senate, and Joe Biden's in favor of it. So I saw a lot of people looking at this record, me included, and I originally came to the conclusion like, man, this record, it's pretty bad. It's pretty bad on Ukraine, and it is a really bad record on Ukraine. But he's no longer just an individual congressperson. He is now the Speaker of the House in a position he's never held before. He's really just shot up the totem pole, and he might even be out of his depth. And so him changing this position, maybe not personally, but from the position of the House Speaker, I don't think that's impossible. Not from what he views personally. Maybe his views personally still align with not sending more aid to Ukraine. But now that he leads a coalition of Republicans, and he also needs to get it passed in a Democrat-controlled Senate, and he has a president who has veto power, he might be willing to bring this to the House floor for a vote. And that's what it looks like, at the very least for now. And he seems to be voicing support in favor of aid. Now, whether or not that support holds, it's going to be long-term. This is somebody who is in the corner with Ukraine against the Russian invasion for the long term. I don't know. I would say Tom Emmer would probably be stronger on this issue because he has a stronger voting record on this issue if he was the Republican House Speaker. But for now, we are at least getting some positive signs from somebody with a terrible record on the issue. We just need to know what he defines Russian success as, Putin's goals as, that we need to prevent, and we need to get what he means by conditions. We need to understand what he means by conditions. He needs to elaborate on that. I suspect it'll be appointing an inspector general to Ukraine aid. I suspect that'll be one of the conditions that are asked for. By the way, I do want to quickly say, even if the Republicans have elected a new House Speaker, it is not impossible that he, with his lack of experience, create some legislation to support aid to Ukraine or support something that those 8 Republicans that ended Kevin McCarthy's speakership don't like, but he has to find some compromise because he needs to compromise with Democrats on something, and then they just call another speakership election. I know the odds are probably not the highest, but it's also not impossible, and I will be keeping my eye out for that.